From 1916 to 1970, the population of African Americans living in the southern states steadily decreased over time. This was the Great Migration. The Great Migration included over 6 million African Americans moving from the rural South to the cities of the North, West, and Midwest of the United States. The Great Migration occurred due to the promise of a better life elsewhere. Day-to-day prejudice and discrimination in the workplace pushed the African Americans away from the South. This massive movement of the population had multiple positive and negative effects. The Great Migration was a powerful influence on America's cultural history. The increased industrialization in the North provided more employment appeal for the African Americans and promoted better racial tolerance for them. By the end of 1919, over 1 million African Americans left the South and headed up north in buses, trains, boats, and some even traveled in automobiles or horse-drawn carts. Having abandoned their homes, the African Americans settled for any living or work arrangements they could find. With the onset of World War I in Europe, industrialized cities in the North, Midwest, and West had a great need of laborers for factories, slaughterhouses, and foundries to support the war effort. They quickly discovered that prejudice in the North, while not as severe as in the South, was by no means non-existent. There is nothing here for the colored man but a hard time which these southern crackers give us. We has not had any work to do in 4 weeks, and everything is high to the colored man, so please let me hear from you by return mail. Please do this for your brother. African American Job Seeker 1. Although segregation existed, segregation was not legalized in the North as it was in the South with the Jim Crow laws. White property owners refused to sell living confinements to blacks. Many African Americans were forced into ghettos. This was an occurrence until the court took it down in the year 1948, which made it illegal for property owners to reject people based solely on their race. In 1865, the violent hate group known as the Ku Klux Klan reared its ugly head to the world. It was formed directly following the Civil War when the Southern generals and statesmen held a secret meeting in December of 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. This, amongst the public's distaste for defeat and the terms that were conditional for their surrender after a hard-fought war, had fostered a deep hatred for the black people's newfound liberties in southern white communities. African American soldiers came home to a changing cultural attitude due to the focus on the war and their contribution during the war. Changing attitude to segregation began to develop stronger than before, but mostly in the northern states and not the southern states. And its violence was clearly revealed. Under Evans, the Klan launched a campaign of terrorism in the early mid-1920s, and many communities found themselves in the grasp of the organization. Bond 20. This was the unwritten history wherein many African Americans were publicly lynched or murdered. As time went on and African Americans migrated north, the attitude on segregation in both northern and southern states would see drastic changes. The KKK would have lynchings well into the 1960s, but that would be their last hurrah. African Americans would find a place in all walks of American life, and the trials and tribulations they endured proved to make them stronger. African Americans would be an inspiration for jazz and later rock and roll, and African American athletes, scholars, and politicians would become the leaders in their respected fields.